And again, if people don't start waking up and recognizing that the first thing you should do if you have cancer is immediately start purging parasites, if nothing else, do that. We're going to see that the next layer of this just keeps marching that way, because really what we need to do is put a line in the sand and say there is a whole bunch of AMA medicine that just does not work and will not work for over 95% of the population.
Welcome to episode 17 on the Holocene podcast. Today we have Dr. Jessie Keener. Dr. Jessie Keener is a homeopath and a naturopath based out of Texas and Mexico. In this conversation, we talk about the COVID pandemic. We talk about the COVID shots and other vaccinations, as well as solutions, including parasite cleanses, breath work, and other forms of detox. Hope you enjoy the show. And as usual, please like, share, subscribe, and click the bell icon to keep up to date with the interviews that I'm putting out. And hope you enjoy. So, Dr. Jessie Keener, thank you for joining me today. I really appreciate you coming on.
It's a pleasure.
What have you been up to recently? Anything interesting?
Well, my life is always interesting because I'm still actively in a practice part-time. And so I have interesting cases. I have just had a mom give birth to a most beautiful conscious baby, and I did all of the prenatal care. There's a little bit of everything going on right now. So yeah, life is very demanding, I would say. But I also know how to take care of myself. Right now, my husband and I are in Mérida, Mexico, which is the capital of the Yucatan, which is just chilled out, friendly, wonderful, great food. So we've decided to move down here in June and just kind of get out of the US for a while, because boy, has that gotten volatile.
Oh, yeah. During the COVID pandemic, me and the missus were looking to move to Mexico. Things here were bad. I'm in the UK. Things were really bad. And we were looking at, where is it? Just, I can't remember. Madeira? No, not Madeira. What's it? In the sort of northern part, above Tulum, as you go a little bit further northwest towards the Gulf of Mexico. I forgot the bloody name of it.
Northwest towards the Gulf. So it's not like Playa del Carmen, Cancun, any of those?
A bit further up.
Yeah, I wouldn't know. So I've abandoned that coast. I only go to that coast for my dental work, seriously, because it's just too much. It's too played. It's too played out. And frankly, the mafia, that the cartel just runs the heck out of that side. Mm. And we're very sensitive to energy. So when we found Mérida, we were like, dude, this is the place. Now, what we've since learned is it's dubbed the safest city in Mexico. And the interesting thing behind that is it's where all the big dons live in the cartels. So they don't want any crime. Their daughters, their nieces, their cousins, everybody lives here in Mérida. So it's safe, it's quiet, and it doesn't have thousands of people disembarking cruise ships. So it's normal, if you will. But yeah, you mentioned the COVID thing. It's been a very enlightening experience for me. And a lot of I told you so, which there's no satisfaction for me as a healer ever in knowing that I predicted something and then it happens and it's devastating. But I actually did see this coming. We were living in Cozumel at the time that this happened. And I'm on the internet. I was still working, doing my practice. I've been doing my practice on the internet for years prior to the lockdown. And all of a sudden we got the announcement and they were saying, we want all Americans to come home, yada, yada. Long story short, we fled back, we got situated, and then I started watching the pressers that President Trump was giving. And I have a very strong gift in something called either the gift of prophecy or inner knowing. And this, I think it was the second or maybe third presser, but all of a sudden my inner knowing started to go crazy when Mr. Trump brought up Anthony Fauci and Susan Bricks. And I just had this download with no visual. It was just all like an intense understanding. And I turned to my husband, I said, OMG, he is setting them up. And he said, what? And I said, you watch, you wait. He's setting them up. And then a few weeks later, I don't know if you remember this, but Then POTUS said something in his typical New York delivery style about blood purifiers, therapeutic blood purifiers, therapeutics for the blood. And then he mentioned ivermectin, hydroxychloroquine. And I'm like, ding, 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 ding. I get it. I get it. And then I watched the backlash and the press took him down and how the CDC said, no, you can't take ivermectin for this. Meanwhile, I've got medical doctor friends treating this sudden surge in respiratory disease with ivermectin, with hydroxychloroquine. And I'll tell you, it's been a fascinating haul. I did a video recording with my stepson in March of 2020. And he said, well, what do you think about this COVID thing? And I said, well, I can guarantee you that if someone's really sick with this, it's most likely a bioweapon. It's most likely bioengineered. And I said, and as horrible as that seems, and it is, I said, what they'll come out with in the way of vaccinations will be worse. And my interviewer was like, really, really? I said, yes, because I've studied the history of vaccinations for so long that I know that each time they come out with a new one, it's had worse and worse side effects. The more recent one that I studied was the Gardasil one, which is just devastating to adolescent bodies. And so my host was like, oh, wow, I can't believe it. I'm like, yeah, actually, this is one of those times where I would say, this is when you want to work on your immune system. This is when you want to start to understand the difference between immunity and anything else going on in the medical model. And then we went on to have a conversation about, what is an immunization versus a vaccination? And this is a juicy distinction that most people have no idea even exists. But given my training, and I'm very versed in both classical homeopathy, but something else that's a newer form of homeopathy, where they actually take the frequencies of all the different diseases and make those into the different remedies for those diseases. So I knew that you could vaccinate or immunize, I should say, someone using homeopathic remedies. I knew that as a fact because that's how I immunized my daughter. So was she at risk for those diseases growing up as a kid? Absolutely not, because she was treated with the quantum remedy of the diphtheria, the smallpox, et cetera, the polio. So immunization has been going on for hundreds and hundreds of years. In fact, in homeopathy, when Hahnemann developed homeopathy, he started treating things energetically using very minute dilutions of things. So in this newer modern, by the way, this was developed in Germany, this new form of homeopathy where you can truly immunize against very particular diseases, in fact, all of them, called no-sode therapy, I realized very quickly, okay, I already have strong antivirals in my practice. I work with homeopathy in my practice, and for antivirals, I have some very lovely compounds made with homeopathic remedies. So I called up one of my favorite companies in March and I said, they're located somewhere in Florida. And I said, hey, do you guys have the frequencies of this new COVID-19? And she said, let me put you on hold for a second. Let me check. Came back a minute and a half later and said, yeah, we got it. And I said, good. So send me a dozen of this particular antiviral and go ahead and add to it the frequencies of the COVID-19. I need 12 of those ASAP. So behind the doors, behind the quiet of practices, this is what's actually available. Now, just kind of park that piece of information aside. We also have found out recently that many, many members of the US government, including Senate and House, were getting treated by their physicians with ivermectin and hydroxychloroquine. So I want to kind of tie some things together really quickly because I love getting a chance to have this conversation. Let's back up for a second and look, what does ivermectin do? Do you remember? I'm sure, Jay, you've heard about this.
Yeah.
Horse wormer, right? Horse wormer, yeah. Dog wormer. So why? Exactly. It's an anti-parasitic. Okay, that's great. And what does hydroxychloroquine treat? What is the most common disease they use it for? Malaria. What is malaria, Jay? It is a parasitic disease. Yeah. So as soon as Trump put out the calm to the world, which he does all the time, and said, hey, blah, 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 hydroxychloroquine, hey, blah, 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 then instantly all the heads that really know what's happening went, ding, 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 that's our answer. Let's get our hands on it. Let's go. Meanwhile, I'm just saying, hey, take your homeopathic and If you're in my practice, you are purging parasites on a very regular basis. It is the #1 cause of all mischief in the body in the world right now. And what's really fascinating is since Rockefeller took over the entire medicine of the planet pretty much 100 years ago, if you'll notice, this is how we handle parasites in the AMA governed medical model. You'd literally have to be in an examination, stethoscope on your chest, physician listening, and have a tapeworm crawl down your nostril in front of your physician for them to think that your asthma, your flu, your COVID, your long COVID, any of these allergies, your menstrual difficulties, and on brain fog, that any of this would have to do with parasites.
Yeah. I'm
So
actually interestingly, because it's a full moon now.
Yeah, well, I'm on my parasite purge right now.
Yeah, same. I do the Holder clock, black walnut, the wormwood, and the
wormwood with the clove.
Yeah, with activated charcoal as well. So I try to do it every full moon. I'll do 3 or 4 days, nothing too intense, but yeah.
Well, I would urge you to get a little more intense, honestly, because I'll tell you, true story. My mentor taught me to purge parasites. This was in the 80s. And we can tell that story in just a minute, but she said every quarter you're going to do a good 10-day purge. Okay. Over time, though, Dr. Jessie here, still in practice, doing practice in Texas, then in Florida, started to see symptoms creeping up in both my bodies and other people's bodies long before that time. So we went to a full moon purge every night. Every full moon, 5 nights, bam. And then I was listening to a podcast with these 2 young doctors who are incredibly functional and all about gut microbiome. And they're like, dude, there's a new moon hatch too. So what we're going to be doing is new moon, full moon. And ever since I started doing that for myself, my husband, my clientele, like almost nobody ever gets sick with anything, like literally. And if they do, a lot of times, Jay, it's self-inflicted injuries. You know, it's eating the pizza with the beer and they're gluten intolerant anyway, or, you know, just doing stuff, you know, running on empty. But yeah, the parasite. So again, there's still a little bit of a cognitive dissonance that I want to try to wrap up in the conversation about COVID and the vaccination. So I really think there were 2 things going on. I really think there was some level of a bioengineered something, because you don't see people going from 0 to on respirators that fast. However, I would also say that 90% of what the average human on this planet had was not that.
Yeah.
What they had was just way too much everything. Parasites hatching. By the way, parasites carry viruses, EMFs, 5G, terrible food. I mean, the food supply has become so ruined with the whole GMO thing, and that's blowing out livers left and right. And then when you look at the AMA and CDC approved treatments for COVID, they were ghastly. Like they were just like, you know, anyone on my side of the fence would be just like, it's a death sentence. It is an absolute death sentence. And of course, that's what happened, because once you deny products like ivermectin and hydroxychloroquine, so now the body isn't shedding the parasites, and there's massive hatching happening because tapeworms and hookworms, their eggs hatch in the lung system and bathe the lungs with the ammonia. And that's going to create that upper respiratory syndrome. You start slapping those people on respiratories, it's a death sentence. So I do think that we had something out there that was bioengineered, but we had a whole lot of other stuff happening. And then, of course, introduce the CDC solution, the multi-billion-dollar solution of mRNA, and you've got that instant combustion. You've got people that never learned anything about their bodies from the pandemic and the shutdown, still marching forward in ignorance. You've got a lot of people that rolled up their sleeves, either through pressure, employers. I mean, this is a first. This is a real first. So we have an aftermath now that is literally compelling me to write a book about where we are. And the title of the book is Who Will Save Our Doctors? Because they are becoming sort of this weird symbol of everything that's wrong with big pharma. And there's been enough disclosure and truthing, and now the frontline doctors are in a lawsuit, and you know, people are suing to get their licenses back because people lost their licenses in this country for continuing to prescribe a Nobel Prize winning in medicine drug. than when the CD said, no, thou shalt not. So I think that that's really where we are. And I guess the next test is going to be this disease X that they're going to try to roll out and see how much gullibility is left in the face of the planet. And are people going to mask up?
That's how I'm dealing with that one. Just, I can't.
Yeah, I am too. I'm just going to completely ignore it. And I'm lucky because I don't live in a city in Texas. I live in a very small town. And the worst that may happen is I have to wear a mask for 20 minutes while I run through the produce aisle of my local grocery store. But that would be the worst that would happen. Everything else is going to be just fine. But you know, this is where we are as a public. We've been duped, we've been hypnotized, and the awakening, sadly, is going to include massive amounts of turbo cancer and dementia and just early death and sudden death and hashtag died suddenly. I mean, it's just, this is where we are. And I'm going to say this out loud, the people least equipped to deal with it are the regular medical doctors, those regular AMA, law-abiding, did what they said. Yes, I gave the shots. Yes, I didn't take hydroxychloroquine when they told me to.
Yeah, right. They gave it and they took it, which worries me, because if something does happen off the back of this, then a lot of our doctors are going to be in trouble. So that's another thing.
Jay, I think we need to level up here. It's not if. It's already happening. I have access to lots of underground information. I'm highly trained in how to stop my mind, and that's a very good thing for the times we're in, because it's really pretty ghastly. But we're early in the aftermath. If we ripen this situation out 3 years and then 5 years, the hashtag died suddenly are just through the roof. The cancers are through the roof. And again, if people don't start waking up and recognizing that the first thing you should do if you have cancer is immediately start purging parasites, if nothing else, do that. You know, we're going to see that the next layer of this just keeps marching that way, because really what we need to do is put a line in the sand and say there is a whole bunch of AMA medicine that just does not work and will not work for over 95% of the population. Let's keep you guys in that 3 to 5% of what walks in the emergency room, or your advanced research on genetics if you want. The rest of you guys, you need to take some lessons from some good naturopaths, some chiropractors, some acupuncturists. You guys need to start practicing ketogenic eating yourselves. You need to stop buying that crap for your wife and your kids and grow up, like wake up, grow up, or you're going to just be an undertaker for a career.
Yeah, I was going to ask you, so 2 questions. Firstly, the place you're talking about in Mexico is Merida. Is that right?
Yes. Yes.
I'm English, so I called it Merida. So just thinking back, that's where it was actually. As soon as you mentioned
what a small world.
Yeah, as soon as I did a load of research and I found that was the safest place on the basis of what you said. Where
safest and most cost effective.
Yeah, it's cheap, it's great, it's a great location, but equally because there's like a truce between the different gangs, like this is where our families live, so it's the safest place. So that was number one. But secondly, I was going to say, in terms of we mentioned the solution, we're going to call it the solution for the show, even though you've said the naughty word a couple of times, the V word, but we'll stick with solution now. So you're obviously running a practice, you're dealing with people who I would imagine some have probably taken the solution. What sort of things are you seeing? Are you seeing enough that is making you worried? And how do you see this all playing out?
Well, okay, that's a really good question. The answer is a little bit complicated. So my patients called me up in a panic at the time when their employers started pressuring them. And one guy worked for Boeing, and this was a huge nonprofit. And I had a bunch of people because one kept referring to others. And they're all like, oh my gosh, what are we going to do? Now, I already mentioned that I'm a quantum practitioner, so I know how to do energy testing on bodies for different substances. And I can remotely test anybody for any substance whatsoever, and I don't actually need them to have the substance or even be holding the substance. They have to name it. So I started energy testing all the people that were getting forced to go ahead and have a solution above and beyond the ones I was giving them that were remedies and natural. And the only one that tested was the J&J one. It was across the boards, age, height, weight, gender, nothing tested. We had all the names of, I just said, just get the names of the available ones from your doc and we'll test and we'll come up with the one that tests the best. And that was the only one that tested. The others just did not test, the Pfizer, the Moderna. Okay, so I have about a dozen people who all those years ago, did the one and done with Johnson and Johnson. It wasn't an mRNA. Notice that they scapegoated it and kicked it off the market. I thought that was very intriguing, that they took the one that wasn't a genetic modifier and said, no, we don't like you, you cause clots. Meanwhile, all the other ones were still causing clots. But hey, this is the sophisticated world of the CDC. So those people, I've only had one person of those dozen have a complication. And it was a very weird eye stroke thing that they were able to solve, you know, and boy, are we grateful. But I was pretty certain that that was related to that particular Johnson & Johnson experience. And then I had a couple that didn't communicate with me, and they came into my practice already having 2 of one of the other company's solutions, but stopped after that. And they seem to be doing really well. But again, I have to say something very clearly. These are people who purge parasites twice a month. These are people who, if I say, gosh, your body's testing sensitive to gluten and corn and soy, they don't eat it. Because if someone can't stay fairly coachable in my practice, I have to excuse them and recommend they go hire a life coach so they can be, you know, coachable, and then come back when they're ready to be coachable. I even have one woman who's wealthy who just keeps a life coach so that she can follow my coaching, because some of the coaching is emotionally challenging. Giving up a favorite food can be heartbreaking. And during a pandemic, it can be even more heartbreaking when you're locked down and, you know, all that. So, but the people that I have experienced witnessing going through the solution are all doing great. That doesn't mean my mind is at peace though, because I still feel like we're looking at a 5-year kind of peak maximum possible fallout. And some of those same people I keep on natural anti-inflammatories like a bromelain enzyme capsule in between meals, or you know, serrapeptase in between meals, just to kind of keep the inflammation down. The other thing that I'm a monster about, Jay, and it really does coincide with the times we're in, is I test cortisol levels for 24/7, because most MDs pull one blood draw at like 8 a.m. or 10 a.m. And cortisol is our stress hormone. And it has been seriously skyrocketing in bodies ever since March of 2020. And when cortisol goes up, all immune functions go down. When cortisol goes too high, all inflammation kicks in. The thyroid stops working properly. The blood sugar destabilizes. Brain farts, brain fog, and dementia type symptoms start happening here. Well, guess what? We've just been through a 5-year, we don't even know what this freak show really is called, but whatever this has been, nobody's cortisol is regulating properly. And even in a functional medical model, it's like they have a tad of amnesia, because they don't realize, well, if Jessie's cortisol is high at 3 p.m., it could also swing high at 3 a.m. And maybe Jessie should be taking something for her cortisol at 3 p.m., but also when she wakes up at 3 a.m. And so it's really weird, because cortisol management is like my key thing besides gut health, because it's been directly scientifically linked to dementia as the leading cause of dementia. And we have a population just turning into zombies right now. So it's a big deal. So again, I don't feel like my population is necessarily a fair test of who went out and rolled up their sleeves for a solution, and how are they doing 3-4 years later? Because these are really that 1% of healthy people.
Yeah. I wonder if the cortisol thing could be linked with the higher level of radiation we're facing. Because I
don't think that's helping.
Yeah, because I know that I actually had a mold expert on the podcast 2 or 3 episodes ago, and we were talking about how radiation can increase the growth and the spread of mold spores, right? So I always wonder what it could do to, say, fungi in the body, or candida, or parasites. So
yeah,
this is
2 things. So heavy metals and or mold will spike all of the pathogenic activity. They love that stuff.
Yeah.
So, and you know, frankly, we're living in a concrete house, a 1-story nice house in Mexico. It's concrete. The odds of mold starting to grow underneath that paint are very, very high. So we have to have air purifiers in every room. Like we just did fresh non-VOC paint, but we know long-term this is going to be an ongoing thing. So mold, and then the heavy metals, and most people are toxic in heavy metals, and you can inherit the heavy metals that your parents had genetically, which will do other things than your own heavy metals from, say, being a stained glass artist like I was in my early adulthood, and then became toxic in lead and almost died. So, there's those two factors, and we have more and more electromagnetic frequency radiation now, but also the sun is getting hotter and brighter. We're moving into a different stage of the sun's life cycle. So we are getting more radiation. And so air purifiers for sure, being conscious for sure. If you understand the problem systemically that the yeast fungus can create, candida style yeast fungus, then of course what you eat needs to be foods that will not feed the fungus. And again, there's a lot of the civilized population, they're just not going to give up their favorite foods. They're just not.
And I always think so the candida's there in a way to help you because you're toxic. So it's living on, it's eating heavy metals and, all the toxins that you got in your gut. So if you have it, I always think don't necessarily try to get rid of it, but try to figure out what's caused it.
Okay, well, stop right there because you have some misinformation. So the challenge is that the candida yeast that we're born with is the harmless one. But once it switches into a parasitic yeast fungus, it is now emitting formaldehyde as its waste byproduct. It is no longer friendly. It's no longer good. Is it useful? From a symbological perspective, metaphysically, yes, because if you've got a problem with candida, it is definitely saying, wake up, you got to embrace your life more, like, hello, because this stuff as a parasitic yeast fungus is virtually embalming us now. Now it's saying, yeah, you'll die eventually, but not before I get my fill.
Yeah.
So it's clearly saying there's something wrong here. If it's eating some heavy metals, that's great. But trust me, your heavy metals are not in your gut because heavy metals are so toxic. They go right into soft tissue. Most people's blood-brain barrier is broken. Most people do not have that intact. So there's some in the brain. The mercury goes in the thyroid. All your soft tissue will have some because it's too dangerous to be in the gut where it's going to go to the liver. So the body says, no, 911, let's get rid of it. So, but it's tricky because I also like what you said about the candida in the gut, which is there's a way to look at this from a aha and not a negative, because everyone that I've ever met, including myself, that had a serious problem with candida, and I did, was a control freak.
Yeah, I did. I had it.
I am a recovering control freak. I really am. And I'm way better. And people that hang out with me like, I would have guessed this about you, Jess. Like, you really can chill out and wear no makeup and not have your hairstyles and not give a you-know-what. And I'm like, but I had to do a lot of recovery in this. Yeah. So if you have a problem with candida fungus, whether it's exhibiting itself as eczema, psoriasis, dandruff, I love all the technical names that they give these things. So we never guess that it's one thing. Yeah. But, anything like that, athlete's foot, jock itch, a whole lot of bloating and gas and whatever, it's probably the fungus among us. And you can just look introspectively and see, never mind hiring a naturopath, but maybe you have some control issues you want to start to work on. Maybe you're not trusting life.
Yeah, well, it's interesting because everything you've just said was me. So I wanted to tell you, I've mentioned this on my channel a few times, and I've had different guests that do different things. And I've linked my issues to about 10 different things because I don't think it's just one. So if people have listened to all my interviews, they could be like, but Jay mentioned this before, and he said it was to do with psychology. Then he said it was to do with a solution he had years ago. But I think ultimately, if you look at things holistically, there's multiple, it's like death from a thousand cuts, right? And there was something I wanted to talk about in terms of solutions. We know what that means. And this is the adjuvants, right? So I had one of these. I traveled to India years and years ago. Before I knew better, I thought better because I've been looking at this stuff for years and years, but I just panicked and I just took one of them. It was a typhoid, and it had that thimerosal in it, which is like a derivative of mercury, right?
Absolutely.
As soon as I had that, I felt horrendous. And about 2 weeks later, I ended up with vertigo, like really bad, bedbound for like 5 days. A couple of years later, COVID happened, and I ended up bedbound again. And then I was freaking out. I thought brain tumor, I don't know, all of these crazy things. And then it led me down this path, which has led me to starting this podcast. I realized we had mold in our house. I realized I had childhood trauma, which I'll say I've dealt with, but I don't think you ever deal with it. I think you're always dealing with it. It's an ongoing thing. because I had an RTT, rapid transformation therapy guy on, who I actually used. Loads of hypnotherapy. I did loads of mercury detoxing with like, what did I use? I used, oh bloody hell, I forgot the name of it right now. It's one of the chelators. It comes from volcano ash. Oh bloody hell, I forgot what it's called.
Oh yeah, I want to say xylitol, but that's not it. But it's the
xylitol. I use xylitol. I use loads of saunas, activated charcoal.
The binders, the good binders. Yeah.
Got into the binders. Then I got into like rebounding and doing all my lymphs and all of this. Then I got into parasites. Holder Clark. I bought a book. It cost me about £100 on eBay, and I've got a zapper, and I've done all the protocol. Anyway, I don't know exactly what cured the ongoing vertigo and the anxiety and the tingles in my legs. And you know, was it removing the mold? Was it the mold detox? Was it the mercury detox? Was it the stress, the inner child? All I know is it's all gone. And I went through this whole thing, and I had candida, and I started going, I need to get rid of it. And then I realized I've got it for a reason. Let's deal with the reason. Then the candida went. So that was interesting. So I've essentially healed myself through a hell of a lot of effort. And people always say, what did you do? And I'm like, I took it seriously, and I went on the journey that life took me on, because that's what it does. This is what this is all about. It's about the journey. And this is what the podcast is now. I'm talking about, and I'm meeting people like you who know more than I do about specific things, and sharing the information of the journey, really. So it's interesting that you mentioned that, because I originally got you on to talk about the solution, but now we're talking about all the topics that I'm into and I've actually sort of done along the way. So there's my little rant there. So I hope you enjoyed that.
Yeah, I loved it. I love hearing about it, because I mean, this is my passion. This is truly it. When I met my mentor, I was fighting 6 actual diagnosed diseases, and I was 25. Oh. And one of those diseases was very painful. I had some kind of weird spinal disorder. They couldn't figure it out, but I had to be on a lot of painkillers, which mucked up my gut. I couldn't really function. I had sciatica, apparently, and that was killing me. But I also had been diagnosed with full-blown menopause, and they told me I'd been in menopause for 4 years already, which tracked with what my physical body did and didn't do, but made no sense to me. I'd been an athlete, I was healthy, I was strong, made no sense. They said, because of the menopause, you've got osteoporosis. You also have osteoarthritis in your entire spine. So you definitely need these pain pills that we're giving you. You're clinically depressed, so here's some antidepressants. We know you're never going to have children. Here's a referral to see a psychiatrist so you can learn to have your condition. And then another doctor said, wow, your pap smear doesn't look good, Jessie. It's blah, 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 blah. And I kind of went a little bit blank, and I said, well, what is it? And they go, well, it's not cancer. I go, okay, well, what do we do? What's the game plan? You know, I'm an athlete. Give me something to train on. And he said, I'll never forget it as long as I live. He goes, oh, no, we're just going to do watchful waiting. And I said, what is that? And they go, well, we watch you and we wait. And I said, wait for what? And they go, for the cancer to appear, because then we can treat you. Oh, and so that was it for me. I mean, literally, that was it. I didn't know in the moment that was it. I was meek and mild and distressed. I went home and I had all these, you know, prescriptions and this referral, and I got mad. And I tore them all up and I threw them in the trash, and I said some expletives. And then I just kind of went like this to the heavens, and I said, okay, I've got the will, but you better show me the way, because I need a way, man. I'm not going down on this ship. And I know I want to have a child someday and be a mom. And come on, show me something. Took 2 years, and I got shown something. And in the meantime, I'd gotten trained in health clinic management. And then I saw an ad in the paper that a clinical nutritionist wanted a clinical manager that had to have experience. I was perfectly trained. She hired me. And then she said, I'm not going to give you paid vacations. You're not going to get bonus, but I will take your health, and you will be my patient, and I'll never charge you. And you can just get all your supplements and remedies at cost. And I went home and thought, oh God, she's going to fire me. And I haven't even started, because I knew my health was so bad. Like, my medical records were like a phone book. And I was a freak, because I had all these diseases at such a young age. People would call me into the exam rooms and introduce me to their student body and stuff. It was crazy. So she went through everything. And at the end, she just very calmly sat and she goes, okay. She goes, all right, well, we're going to reverse this. And I said, okay, reverse what? And she said, oh no, all of it. And I go, all of it? Even the menopause? And she goes, well, didn't you tell me you wanted to be a mother someday? And I said, well, yeah, but, and she says, okay, I need 2.5 to 3 years of your time, and you need to be 100% coachable. And I said, done. 2.5 years later, everything was reversing or reversed. A year and a half after that, I gave birth to a beautiful 7.5-pound baby girl at home underwater.
Wow. Was this
Who's never ever had a solution, if you know what I mean.
Yeah. Was this all the sort of stuff that I'm talking about, the inner child work and stress
Yes.
management and different
Yeah,
detoxes?
I became so what happened, it was really I've had a lot of weird things happen that ended up beautiful, like a miracle. So I find out that I'm pregnant. I'm literally holding the EPT test, the pregnancy test, and it's like positive, and I'm like, do 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 do, and I have this real kind of like extrasensory perception moment. And then this voice in my head, loud, masculine, but not too loud. It wasn't uncomfortable. It just filled all my space inside of me. Male voice said, yes, my child, and you will have your baby born underwater. I kid you not. Not even a minute later, my phone rings. This was back in the early 80s where you run to get the phone on the cord and you pick it up and sit down. And it's my buddy, Richard. And he goes, I just got this weird thing that I had to call you. What's going on? I go, oh, you're not going to believe it. I haven't even called my husband yet. Richard was a really close friend. He goes, okay. I said, well, I think you should sit down. He goes, okay, I'm sitting. Oh, I'm pregnant. He goes, oh my God. I said, but that's not even half of it. And then this voice in my head said, I'm going to have my baby underwater. I don't know what I'm doing here. And he goes, hold on. I'm going to get my little black book. I'm like, okay, all right. And he comes back and goes, here's the person you need to call. She lives right here in our town. She is the National Underwater Birth Coach. Write this down. Give her a call. She'll handle this for you.
Wow.
She introduced me to breath work. She was a big rebirthing fanatic, and her system of doing underwater birthing included resolving your own trauma from your birth and your own childhood trauma and your own views about your body and pain and love and all these things. So I did 9 months of breath work getting ready for my underwater birth. And then I thought I'd be done with breath work. I was not done with breath work. I had to pick it right back up. I went on and got trained and did certification, worked with Leonard Orr, many famous names in the breath work. And that's what really gave me the edge with the childhood trauma. What I didn't find out until years after, I'm still doing breath work though, thank goodness, because I find out from my shrink who says, I want you to ask your dad if your mother ever tried to kill you. And sure enough, dad was still cognizant and alive and kicking. He said, oh yes, let me tell you what happened. So I didn't know that part of my trauma, which I knew I had PTSD. By the time I met my mentor, I was pretty clear about that. And so was she, all the signs, all the insomnia, all the excessive thinking, over functioning, you name it, I had it. But I didn't know that I had an infant trauma that nobody ever told me about. So with other more conscious breath work, I was able to get deeper into that trauma. And, as an infant, when you're 4 months old and you're being physically attacked, I don't think anyone could actually access solid memories of that, but I could access the heat sensation and I knew exactly what it was. And I was able to do breathing through that. So my theory about civilized Americans, and definitely UK and probably everywhere that's called a civilized country, we all have PTSD. And we may not have all the features of the mental illness called PTSD, but guarantee we have the features of what I call, and I don't think anyone else is calling it yet, chronic biochemical PTSD. Everything's a little under functioning. Everything's a little inflamed. Thyroid's a little low because cortisol's always a little too high. We're not really, all of us, up in the frontal cortex. Some of us are sliding back here for parts of the day. All of our politicians are functioning in the reptilian brain for sure, except for maybe a couple. So we really have this situation, I think, where in order for people to really be well, they've got to confront their trauma. They've got to confront their breathing trauma. I mean, if you just think about a hospital birth for any one of us, were you born in a hospital, Jay?
Yeah, I was, yeah.
Okay, so the standard, and I had to go through this in training, but once the baby clears the body, you're supposed to grab it up and now. After floating in bliss for 9 months and being grabbed, held upside down, and ka-ching in a freezing room temperature room, you're going to overinflate the lungs on the first breath, which burns them and is painful. And then that little psyche says, well, God dang it, I'm never doing that again. And we actually never take a full breath again after that. until we resolve that breathing trauma. So right at birth, we're instilled with some belief systems that are pretty horrendous, like people are dangerous, life is hard, breathing hurts, have a nice life.
Yeah. Oh God. I have breathing problems. I had asthma as a kid.
I can fix that.
Yeah. Okay. Maybe I'll send you an email.
You should let me fix that for you, because that one's not that hard. But there'll be an underlying, still some underlying emotional.
I have this freak like thought of like drowning. I've recently I've been into martial arts for quite a while, and I've recently just added Brazilian jiu-jitsu as well. So I've been doing quite a bit. And one of my friends was telling me, you know, because he taught me into doing jiu-jitsu. I do Muay Thai with him. He's like, you need to come jiu-jitsu as well. And he's like, the feeling I can only explain is like drowning. And I'm thinking, I'm not doing it. And I've gone along, I'm like, I'm going to do it. I'm going to face the fear. And obviously when you've got some fully grown dude in a hot, sweaty, you know, room, and he's on top of you, and you literally feel like you are drowning. And I've learned to weather it. So if I'm in that position, normally I'd hit the panic button, I get this superhuman strength.
Yeah. Whereas
now I'm like, Jay, calm it. And I'm breathing, and I'm in
breathing.
Yeah. That's helped me, honestly, no end. But this horrible thing I get of, this is why I didn't wear the mask, even at the beginning when, I knew it was a scam, but at the beginning when it was, really pushing it, I'm like, I can't wear it, mainly because I can't breathe and I can't have this, and it just freaks me out.
Yeah. Yeah.
But yeah, the lungs thing.
It's a really interesting thing. When I met Teresa Dale, my mentor, who now runs the California College of Natural Medicine out in Malibu, where she belongs. She's like the Hollywood beauty. But she said straight out, she said, all asthma is caused by chronic parasites. All asthma is caused by chronic. Now, you may still have a little bit of a food sensitivity that you're not aware of that's feeding into the pattern. If you're just purging your parasites once a month, I would urge you to go to twice a month, new moon, full moon, because maybe you're just staying a little bit too far behind that 8 ball, my friend.
Could be.
Could be. With everything else you've done, I'd say, well, that's the next thing to do for sure.
Yeah.
And you're not going to get terrible die-off symptoms because your body's used to doing the purge. So I just say, up your game, new moon, full moon. And that's when the candida is going to be surging also. So hit some good probiotics.
What do you think of the zapper for parasites?
I like the zapper, but okay, so let's go back to when Hilda Clark was alive and developed a zapper.
Yeah.
We have so much EMF now. We have so much more stuff. There were no chemtrails. You know what I'm saying? There's just so much more stuff. I don't think people can really stay ahead of the game with just the zapper. I don't. Yeah. I love all that stuff. I have cold lasers. I love gadgets. I have a rebounder. I have all the things. But I'd say if someone's relying on the zapper, they're probably going to get behind the 8 ball. And again, as you pointed out, all that extra radiation from the electrical, from the sun, there's radioactive materials in those chemtrails they're spraying in the sky. So we're just filling up.
And I know with like the modern diet, not enough nutrients and minerals, and acidity levels in the stomach are a lot lower. You know, years and years ago, when you're sort of picking things up off the ground and it's muddy and dirty and you're eating it and your gut's just ready to nuke it. Whereas now I think a lot of parasites are getting through. And
absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, the elevated stress hormone will cause that low stomach acid. So, one of the things I want your audience to really take away from this is that when the stress hormone's too high, you won't be able to tell. Unless you have insomnia, that's one tell, or unless you have a racing heart, that's another tell. But 99% of the time, my patients can't tell. But here's what's happening. Your stomach acid is basically quitting. Why? Because if you're in a fight or flight response, you don't need to be breaking down the bacon and the eggs from 2 hours ago. All of your energy is going to be in your lungs, your heart, and your limbs, so you can put up the good fight. So nothing's going to digest. It's going to actually completely stop.
Yeah.
Your peristalsis to the colon will either get really quick and then quit, or just quit. Your thyroid's down regulating like crazy because it can't put up with all that adrenaline because you're not putting up a good fight. So I laughingly tell my CEOs, I need you to get a rebounder and a suspended punching bag in the corner of your office today. And they're like, what? And I said, you're never going to get your stress hormone under control unless in between clients and appointments, you can get on the rebounder and then go like this. Yeah. Because that's what this is a drug made for one thing and one thing only. So if it's too high, you are set up for a myriad of diseases. Your stomach pH goes. So if we're not digesting our protein, we're fermenting our protein. And fermented protein is no longer protein. It's now toxic. In fact, I had to memorize the 10 noxious gases formed by in the human body by putrefying animal flesh. I had to memorize these for my final exam in naturopathic medicine. I have deleted 9 of them, but the last one I keep for real effect, dramatic effect. It's called cadaverine. So everyone's walking around with low gut acid. They can't break stuff down. All their energy's in their limbs. They're barely breathing. They've got low motility in the intestines. The thyroid's barely passing a blood test. And they think they're well and they think they're healthy. In fact, I just did an intake on a woman yesterday. Turns out she starts with how healthy she is. By the end, she's on all these medications. And I'm like, okay, I'm just going to stop you right here. We're going to fix this, but I need you to understand you're not healthy. What you said about yourself is not scientifically accurate. You defined health as you don't have any symptoms or diseases, but you are not healthy. So that's the problem. People don't even know what healthy is anymore. And I think that's a little bit by design.
Yeah, it's that thing again. It's the death from a thousand cuts. Just
Yes.
slowly just withering away. I liked what you said about essentially stagnated. That's what we are. We're stagnated. We're sat in chairs all day. We're in offices. There's no airflow. We're not outside getting proper oxygen. We're not breathing properly. So we're stressed. We're stagnated with past trauma that we don't even understand. It's just unconscious.
We're stuck in the fear dance. We're just stuck in the fear dance. And it's the death dance. Fear is the death dance. That's what nobody's really talking about.
That's exactly where I was. And all the things I've done have all contributed to undoing in some way or another this. And whenever I talk to anyone, I mean, I'm no health expert. I never would claim to be. But I know people, I have friends, I have family, and they look at me and what I've done and they'll ask my advice. And I will always start with, you need to get out of fight or flight. It's number one. Because whatever you're doing, if you're in that situation, and fight or flight, you can be ticking over for decades without knowing. It's very subtle. But if you're waking up at stupid o'clock in the morning and you're tossing and turning, you can't get to sleep, your mind's always just going mad, you're not digesting food, or you've got some sort of intolerance, you're getting stressed, things like this, for me, I'm like, that's the sign. I would also say, this is something I've recently done. I'm like 120 days now without alcohol. If you've got any kind of thing going on, you need to quit that, for me, or take a break from that, because you're never going to get out of the fight or flight response or the stress anxiety cycle of doom when you're poisoning yourself with that as your number one. So these are what I tell people, and this normally kickstarts people like researching the next thing, and before you know it, they've got a rebounder, a punching bag, and a zapper.
Yeah, exactly. Well, and I think for a lot of people, even though it may seem weird, there's a lot to be gained from breath work. I mean, you know, I cold turkeyed everything. And I was only 24, so I didn't have like a really long tenure with drugs and alcohol or anything, but I was definitely a user of things. And I quit everything cold turkey. And I definitely didn't lose friends, but I noticed I wasn't invited to any parties for 2 years because I had to make new friends that were into, you know, wheatgrass juice and growing sprouts and other things. But the thing that concerns me the most right now is that I see a lot of people who don't know their stress hormone is high. In fact, the vast majority of people I intake with have no idea that, because they sleep at night and they're not taking a drug to do it. So that's the confusing part, is how could you sleep at night if your fight or flight thing is turned all the way up, which for some of my patients, it was really high at night. And it's a lot of times it's because they exercise, they've got a busy day, they're active and they're exhausted. But while they're sleeping, one foot's on the gas and one foot's on the brake, and they're inflaming. And those precious endocrine glands, the thyroid, the pancreas, that's your blood sugar, nothing can reset. And we don't get the deep delta waves in the brain. And this is a recipe for cancer, a recipe for Alzheimer and dementia. So, you know, I tell people, look, I don't know where you live. Some of my people are in other countries. I found out 8 years ago that Ireland was banning ashwagandha, and one of my clients was living and working in Ireland. So I'm seeing the tightening of the noose on certain very effective herbs that really help regulate cortisol, like ashwagandha is now banned in Ireland. But Gosh, there's
recently actually. I bought a coffee, ashwagandha coffee.
Yeah, I love it. I think it's great. And so if people are worried that maybe their stress hormone is high, and how would you know if your stress hormone's high? Here's your obvious answer. If you have any fear-based thoughts, any anxious thoughts, any, oh no, I'm late kind of stuff, your cortisol is high and it's probably chronically high. So you can look to what we call stress adaptogens. And besides the ashwagandha, holy basil is awesome. But there's like 25 different ones. They're all great and work differently. But I think everyone these days needs some stress adaptogens, because I mean, if you look at the powers that be, they are just turning up they're cranking on that fear volume. It's like quadraphonic stereo now.
It's on both sides as well. You've got like the normies who are buying into all the nonsense, but then you've got the alternative people who are just as bad. That, God, sharing, the economy is going to crash and this and that. I've detached from all of it. I'm just focused in my own little zone. Like I said, I've realised the importance of being out of fight or flight. So I know that I create my own reality in my own bubble, and that's all I now need to know. You've mentioned a few times the breath work. I've been on your website. Yes. I've had a look. I've seen a lot of sort of what you're talking about. Do you mind if we just go into some advice or some techniques on the breath work and why you think it's so powerful, and just some tips on what people can do to get themselves started to sort of see the benefits, especially if they are in fight or flight, they are anxious.
A couple of very interesting things I learned from a guy that I brain trained with her now for 15 years, but his earlier work was breath related. He had a serious brain injury, and long story short, he had a bunch of near-death experiences in a row at the age of 15, 16, and 17. He was Canadian, and had a bunch of just experiences, I guess you'd say, in a different dimension when he would be dead. And in that dimension, someone came up to him, approached him, and started to explain to him that he could train his body-brain system with brain waves through breathing. He could do healing work on himself using certain breathing techniques to control brain waves. So he learned that if you breathe in and out the mouth, that is a beta wave in the brain, and the beta wave controls all of our physiology. So if I stub my toe, I'm going to start breathing shallow, rapid, mouth, because shallow, rapid is I need to get some room around this. I don't want to do deep breathing and increase the sensation. Shallow, rapid decreases the sensation only a little bit. Then I can go, okay, now that it's decreased a little bit, what else can I do for this stub toe? But regular, every day, all day long, we want some mouth breathing. You know, most of us in this society breathe through our nose, right? And we're you know, as I was growing up, my mom would say to me, Jessie, close your mouth. Don't be a mouth breather. Like that was actually a criticism and a judgment. But what I've learned with the breath work is, but we need some mouth breaths. If I'm getting ready for an athletic event, I'm not going to sit there and go, I'm going to stoke it up, right? Yeah. So nose is a theta wave. And I always remember theta as the thinking. So theta is the wave of information gathering. So then when you think about the modern age, it makes sense that everyone's breathing through your nose because we're always information gathering. To the detriment of the body, I will add. That's my 2 cents right there, because now we're sacrificing mouth breath, which governs the body. So we really are now becoming walking, talking heads, disconnected from the body. And then interestingly enough, nose, mouth is delta, which is sort of the integrative brainwave where things all get kind of pulled together. Delta is also the wave of Sufi dancing and ecstatic dancing. It's a high delta wave. So a lot of the information out there in books is wrong because they just talk about low wave, low delta, you're asleep, end of story. No, there's a whole nother story, high delta. A high theta wave would be, you're probably getting a massive download, right? But a low theta would be stuck in repetitive thinking. I'm thinking, I can't get the hamster off the wheel. And then mouth nose is your, what am I missing? Beta, alpha. That's your alpha wave for your emotions. But who breathes out mouth nose when they're upset? Nobody, because nobody knows that would actually resolve the emotional upset. So it's really cool stuff. So what we did then is we started putting patterns together where you do like maybe like 4 breaths in the mouth and out the mouth, and then maybe 4 mouth, nose, and then 4 nose, nose, and then different rates and speeds, just seeing, you know, what, and we would get into such a high gamma state. So gamma is the brainwave state of complete integration of all the other waves. And that's what Joe Dispenza's work is about, helping people meditate and get to gamma, that supernatural state. I've spent an enormous amount of time in gamma without a Joe Dispenza workshop, and it was all done through these breathing techniques. When you get to a gamma state, you are beyond the mind, and you're really in a field that is, I guess, the matrix itself. It's not, you're not you anymore. You're more than you, and you're connected to much more, and you cannot actually think at all. You can't verbalize. But as you start to come down from that peak, that's when I was able to do energy work on people, or, you know, have really great, you know, illuminated sharing come out of my mouth, that kind of stuff. But it's a state of being that I feel like culturally we've been programmed further and further away from. Nobody talks about being in a gamma state, but it's our natural design to get to that gamma state. But everyone's so disrupted by the electromagnetic frequencies, the bad chemistry, the glandular deficits, you know, the fluoridated pineal glands, that they don't even have a sense of how great gamma can be. Trust me, gamma is amazing, and it is great, and we can't stay there always. That's not real life. But I think if we had practices that pushed us into some gamma pretty frequently, we'd probably be more empowered, more productive, and have more longevity.
Yeah, it's interesting you say about the Joe Dispenza. I did one of his, I used to do it a lot, but one time I did one of his meditations, and I've done psychedelics in the past. And you know, when you get the fractal colors, I'm not joking, I had that. And I had it in some freaky, trippy. The issue was, it's easy to panic and pull yourself out of it. So I was just trying to go with it, and I went with it. I don't know, maybe a minute or 2 of that state before I pulled myself away. But it was such an unbelievable experience. It felt like a trip. So I know it's real. I've seen it.
Yeah, it's definitely a multi-dimensional experience. I am ayahuasca trained, so anything compared to that is easy to handle. Like ayahuasca, you're just like, okay. I mean, literally one of the best experiences of my life, besides breath work and group breath work, because when you do this type of conscious breathing in groups, the gamma that each person receives is like 1,000-fold.
Yeah.
And I'm sure everyone's gamma experience is different. Like yours was very visual, very kind of DMT fractal-like, whereas mine is no visual whatsoever, just complete space, like just, but that might be what my consciousness needs for a gamma experience. You with me?
Yeah. Well, the other times I had that the other times, by the way.
Yeah.
So that was the state of nothing. It was actually nothing, just in this peace. Yeah. So you can get through. I mean, how long would you be doing this technique? And is it a certain amount of seconds in, a certain amount of seconds out? How do you, or what would you recommend as like a basic way to get yourself started?
I mean, just to get started, I would say just try 4 in and outs of each one of the patterns: mouth, 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 nose, 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 mouth, back to mouth, mouth. And if you do 4 times of each one of those, you're going to get a pretty heady sensation if you're breathing properly, which 99% of the people I see for the first time do not take a proper inhale into their belly, opening up the diaphragm. They breathe up here because they're stuck in perpetual chemical fight or flight. So often I have to have them lie down. I put my hands on their belly, and I'm not pushing, but I'm just letting the weight of my hands be there. And I'll say, listen, Jay, on your inhale, I need you to move my hands up 2 inches.
Yeah.
Okay, now you're getting like, oh no, that feels weird, Dr. J. I'm like, oh, I know it feels weird. You haven't done this since you were a baby, honey. It's okay. Let's keep going. Let's try a few more of these breaths, because this is your natural God-given breath. The other thing was blasphemy. That was not real breathing. But yeah, so the main thing, so why breath work? Many reasons, but nothing more important than solving the brain-body chaotic connection that most of us have, and it creates an autonomic nervous reset. Now that's huge for bodies. That's really huge. Bodies need that. Secondly, it gives us a chance to really look at some belief systems that can come up during the breathing session, such as, this is uncomfortable, I hate it. Why am I doing this? I could be doing my laundry. I don't really like my body anymore anyway. Oh shit, did I just say that? Oh, I don't like my body. Wow, that's my belief system. No wonder I don't want to breathe here. Wow.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's just that time with self, and you have to stay the game. It's like it's the martial arts of consciousness, as far as I'm concerned, because anything and everything goes. And I've done sessions for 2 hours straight, ended up in total bliss, but halfway through, I wanted to say F you to my teacher and walk out.
Yeah. And
it was too uncomfortable.
There's something in those thoughts that pop up, and don't just let it pass. You need to kind of lean into that and look at why
and focus and also focusing on the sensations in the body. This was all new to me. Remember, I was newly pregnant. My mentor said, we're going to do breath work for 9 months. I'm like, okay, I don't know what that is, but I'll pay for it. Okay, if I have to do that to get a baby underwater, I'm doing it. But little did I know how uncomfortable it would be, and to be able to just put all of your focus on that one place on your left rib that keeps smarting as you take that fullness of the breath. And what is that about? And then watching my ego go into all kinds of things about this, and then letting it finally just having me just go, okay, well, I'm just going to let it be there. And then my teacher would say, well, maybe it wants to teach you something. Maybe it has a voice. Does it want to say something? Pay more attention, pay even closer attention. Oh, yeah, it feels sad to me. Okay, keep breathing. So it's just this discovery about all this stuff that's in here that most of us go wandering around like with no idea. So the thing that I've come up with all of this 40 years of self-work, consciousness raising, ayahuasca, you name it, there's not a psychedelic I haven't done, etc., but with good teachers, is that we are designed for so much more than this. And our true design is immortality. And we have been so embedded with belief systems that none of us have access to that immortality. And the thinking and the belief systems store in the body and upend all of our metabolic and organ functions. So it's really about getting beyond the belief systems. And in a really good way, I think that's part of what the pandemic is bringing to a head. And the last one and the next one coming, because I think they're going to try it again, was to help people crystallize their belief systems. Because a very rigid belief system will then either break or they'll go down with that belief system. When it breaks apart, they have a chance now. Wow, I can regroup. I could change my mind. I could look at this differently. That old belief system doesn't work anymore. As an example, I thought it was healthy, but I just got diagnosed pre-diabetic. So my old belief system called how this is healthy, that one doesn't work. I need a new belief system.
Yeah. So we've gone over a lot here.
Yeah.
It's great. It's been entertaining, but it's been kind of a bit everywhere. So I'm trying to work out not necessarily your protocol, because obviously you have different clients that have different, issues, but you're looking at the physical side of things, you're looking at their environment, you're looking at putting them on different cleanses, maybe testing, looking at their gut microbiome. Are you sensitive to anything, etc. But equally, you've got this whole other side of what you're doing, which is the psychological, which is the breath work, the
mental health. I don't want to call it psychological at all, because this is way beyond psychology, but it is mental health. It is definitely the mental health.
Just going into the subconscious and the inner child, and the shadow,
the emotional body, and the stuck way of being, the patterns that we get stuck in. I always have to have the chocolate at this time of day. It's a stuck way of being, and it's covering something up. So let's lift up that Pandora's box. Let's get in touch with what's there. And usually underneath it all, it's just good old-fashioned fear anyway, right? So when I take a client on in the first visit, and then I usually need to remind them of this many, many times afterwards, and I do it very lovingly, and I say, now you'll remember this from before, but it's time for me to remind you again that healing your body is a journey of self-love. You thought when you hired me it'd be a journey of food and lotions and potions and tinctures and homeopathics and blah, blah, and it is. But the fuel all the way is going to be self-love. And in order for you to keep upping your game with self-love, you have to develop a lot of compassion for yourself, and then keep developing more compassion for yourself. Because being healthy in this world is a Herculean effort.
Yeah, so it's the cement that holds it all together. You can't do a parasite cleanse, but if you're looking at life as some toxic, negative mess, things always happen to me and it's all negative, then it's not really...
I just call it the victim consciousness, right? You and I were embedded in victim consciousness until we stumbled into a few of the right things, and God bless us, got a few knocks on the head. And then eventually we started to wake up and go, oh, wow, I am embedded in a victim consciousness about what I've got here. I can speak openly about my mother and what she did, because I've done all my work. You said something earlier and I didn't argue with it, but I will say this. I have recovered from my trauma. Can I have things happen in today's world that'll remind me of something in the past that's traumatic? Yes. But my brain training is so solid that I just go, oh, there that is. And then I do a quick breath and I actually thank it. I thank it for showing up and reminding me, because I think it's important that we know we've made that progress. So sometimes it'll just little things will happen. Maybe someone says something in an angry tone of voice to me and that can remind me of my mother. But I've gotten stronger and my breath doesn't change. My breath used to change. I'd go into a startled reflex. Now my breath is just belly breathing throughout. So it's
like a muscle. I guess what I meant actually, just thinking back to the comment, is because I think some people, they want a quick, we're taught to think this way. We want the pill, we want the quick fix. And I guess what I mean is, you know, you'll heal it, but you can't just heal it and then it's gone. You have to train that muscle. You have to stay on top of it and see the signs. Like I'm learning all the time. I've gone through loads of it. I'm actually reading a book at the moment called Do the Work.
Oh, good one. Yeah.
Oh man, I thought I was figuring things out, but this is like penny drop after penny drop. She mentioned about the dishes, doing the dishes. So if I come back and the missus, you know, she's had her lunch and she's not done the dishes, I get annoyed, just like what she was saying in the book. And I'm like, I get annoyed. She thinks I'm annoyed because of the dishes. I don't really know why I'm annoyed, but the dishes are not done. And then I've realized it's symbolic of you not considering me. So I've told her this, and now she's doing the dishes when it needs to be done because she knows that I'm going to see it as you're not considering me. But then equally, if she doesn't do it, I'm now thinking it's not the dishes, it's this. And then I'm looking at this, and everything just takes you deeper and deeper. It's like an onion, and these layers are coming off and off, and you have to stick with it. You can't just figure two things out and go, I've mastered it. It's an ongoing, ever going. And maybe that's the part of life. Maybe we have this situation as children where we're in the, I don't know, the theta brain state as babies, and we are traumatized. You can't get away from the trauma. It's there, and maybe life is about trying to figure it out and learn and, you know, get past these traumas, because at the end of each one is a gift. And if there was no trauma, there'd be no gift, right?
Right. And it's a hell of a way to level up, but I don't think we level up without that. I mean, it really is. One of the things I learned, I was working alongside an associate of mine in Austin, Texas, about 35 years ago. And I asked him if I could get on his table and would he check me for parasites, because we just do a quick muscle testing thing. It's very fast. He got me up there. He tested. I flunked. He goes, yep, you got him. And I was distraught, because I had just finished a cleanse 3 weeks ago. And I said, well, that's weird, Jack. I just did a cleanse 3 weeks ago and I have him again. He goes, well, you know, and he was a very spiritual guy. And he said, you know, Jessie, I think that when people are aware that they have parasites, like you are now aware that you have parasites, it's a great opportunity to leave victim consciousness behind. And he just smiled and said, I'm going to go wash my hands. I'll catch you later. I was like, wow, I'm going to remember that. So that we have a culture that says you are a victim and you're going to fight the victim and you're going to be Rocky and win, but you're still going to be a victim. And you may not see how you're a victim. You may not know how you're a victim, but you are god darn going to be a victim. And so to actually say, well, wait, I'm going to take on the whole thing. I'm going to take on the whole shebang and learn to rise out of that consciousness and into whatever Jessie is beyond that. That's where I'm headed, right? I'm not going to stay stuck. So I think there's two kinds of people in our reality. And I do think the modern world is about what you just said, Jay, for most people. Very few people are going to get beyond feeling better and being less sick. We're not the norm, and probably our trauma-based beginnings made us not the norm. So we're going to go all the way out on the edge and then see what we can do to help humanity from that place. But there's two kinds of people, the victims and those emerging victorious. That's it.
Yeah.
And I work with the ones that are emerging victorious, and sometimes I do have to knock them on the head a little bit and go, John, wait, do you want to be a victim about this? Because, you know, when we started our work together, it was all about you wanted to emerge victorious from this. Now I'm hearing victim. Are you doing your breathing exercises?
Yeah. Wow.
Yeah.
What a chat we've had. That's probably a good place to leave it, unless there's anything else you wanted to.
No, I think this has been great. It's been fun. You're a great interviewer. You ask great questions. I've loved it.
Awesome. Thank you.
Hopefully,
I'll share all of your links anyway at the in the show notes. But is there any? Did you want to sort of give any shout outs or talk about what you're doing, what's up and coming, or where people can find you, your website and?
Well, you can definitely find me at drjessie, JESSIE.life. That's my website. I'm also on Twitter at drjessie, and Facebook under Jessie Keener. And yeah, I'm starting this book called Who Will Save Our Doctors. It's going to be a little bit long and a little scary, but it's going to cover a whole lot. So I'll keep you posted on that, but I'm thinking it's a good year out. And then to all of your listeners, I just want to say thank you. Thank you for being open. Thank you for being interested. Your willingness to change is enough if you just stay willing and stay a little focused on what you think your next step is. It's always going to be about baby steps. Jay took baby steps. I took baby steps. Eventually your baby steps become more substantial, but start with one thing and get better at that one thing.
Awesome.
That's it.
Great advice.